Hi, welcome. Okay, in this video, I want to talk to you about sewing a straight line. But before I can really talk about sewing a straight line, I need to talk to you a little bit about math and seam allowances. When you are cutting a pattern or just cutting out a piece of fabric to sew, you need to account for seam allowances. You need to take into consideration that you'll need some extra space in the piece of fabric for sewing. Now, the standard seam allowance is 5/8 of an inch, which is about 1.5 centimeters. But a seam allowance can also be 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 of an inch, 1 inch. Seam allowances may vary just depending on preference and what you're sewing, but the standard is 5/8 of an inch. So that's what I'll mostly be using in this video. Now, I am going to be making a very simple project. It will be a pillow, and that's how I'll demonstrate to you just the basic stitching of a straight line. But what I'll be doing before that is cutting out the pieces. So let's go back just a bit with the fabric that I'm using. You can see I have some fabric here and it is doubled. So when I cut it, I'll be cutting out two pieces. This is just some cotton fabric that I'll be using to make the pillow. I have the fold there on the left, which I'll eventually be cutting open. And then the selvages are on the right side. So I want my finished pillow to be 18 inches long and 13 inches high. But I could not just measure it out that amount because I need seam allowances. If I didn't have seam allowances and I went ahead and cut it exactly 18 by 13, my finished product after it was sewn would not be 18 by 13. So I had to add seam allowances, and I needed two seam allowances for each edge because I'll be sewing a top and a bottom and a left and a right. So if I do 5/8 twice, if I add 5/8 plus 5/8 or 0.625 plus 0.625, I get 1.25, which is 1 1/4 inches. So that's the amount that I need to add to my fabric for both edges because I'm doing a seam allowance for top, one for bottom, one for left, and one for right. So rather than just measuring 18 by 13, I had to measure 19.25 and 14.25 to account for the addition of the seam allowances. And here's a quick drawing to give you a visual of the numbers. All right, so on this paper, I've already converted my fraction to a decimal. So 5/8 becomes 0.625, and I got that by dividing 5 by 8. And then on the other side, 0.625 times 2 equals 1.25 or 1 1/4 inches. And I did that because I'm going to need two seam allowances for the length and then also two for the height. And then I went ahead and added 18, which is my length, plus 1.25, which is those two seam allowances, and I got 19.25 or 19 1/4. And then I did my height, and I think I put T here for tall. It's supposed to be 13H, but 13 plus 1.25 for the seam allowance gives me 14.25 or 14 1/4 inches. Those are my measurements, and then I'm drawing a diagram to show you the measurements I started with and the measurements that the fabric will be once the seam allowances have been added. Now that we've done the math and cut the pieces out, we're just about ready to sew these pieces together and get to the straight lines. Because I'm sewing a pillow, I'm going to leave a portion open to insert the cotton. And you saw me make two marks up there, and that's where I'll be leaving it open. You can see the two marks here. So I'll be sewing around but leaving that portion open. Okay, so here I am at the machine, and I was just showing you where the 5/8 line is on my machine. And I am just going to get the fabric under this presser foot and line it up with the 5/8 line. and begin to sew. Now, the main thing to consider when you're sewing on a machine, well, some of the things to take into consideration are the pressure you're putting on the pedal and how you're holding onto your fabric. Now, the feed dog is going to move the fabric along. It's, if you've ever driven a car, it's like when you put your foot on that gas, it's going to go. It's the same thing with this machine. When you put your foot on the pedal and press, the feed dog is going to move the fabric along, and you need to know how to steer the fabric. In general, it's going to go straight on its own, but it will veer off sometimes. So you need to be holding it to guide it through under the presser foot, but not too tight that it doesn't go, and also not too loosely so that it gets away from you. It's really just a matter of practicing how much pressure to put on the pedal and how to hold the fabric. So you can just practice sewing straight lines. You could practice sewing zigzag lines. I've drawn some lines on fabric and just go over that with a sewing machine, practicing sewing on those lines and controlling the pedal and controlling how the fabric is going through. Now, I left this part in because this is a realistic occurrence that will happen when you're sewing. Sometimes your bobbin will run out and you need to stop and insert a new bobbin that's filled, or refill the bobbin you were using, and the machine will sound a certain way when that begins to happen, because it's like the top thread still wants to go, but there's no more thread on the bottom for it to grab onto. So it's a certain sound. And as you sew more and more, you'll become familiar with sounds of the machine and what those sounds are indicating. So that was just a moment where my bobbin ran out and I had to stop and refill it. But I did get these pieces sewn together, and I left that gap at the top, which is where we're going to insert our, what's it called, cotton or fiber fill. And so something that you want to do when you're sewing straight lines and you have these right angles, these corners, is you want to clip the corners right up to the stitch line. Don't cut it through the stitch line, uh, or even you can get as close as you can without cutting the stitch line, and also trimming your seam allowances down. And what that is going to do is prevent so much bulk from being inside your pillow or whatever item you're sewing once you turn it the right side out, because currently it's inside out, and we're going to turn it right side out because when you're sewing, you put the two right sides together and sew, so that when you finish, you turn it inside out and you have the correct side showing. So I'm clipping the corners. I just cut the little triangle off at the corner, and I'm going to trim this around just to prevent bulk, this excess fabric in the seam, from making my finished product so bulky. So when I got to the two notches where I left the gap open, I didn't trim down the seam between those two notches, those two marks, because I am going to end up needing some seam allowance left over to sew the pillow closed when I'm done stuffing it. So I just kind of clipped right up to those points and left the seam allowances intact at the gap. And now I'm just turning it right side out. I'm turning the pillow right side out. I've sewn my straight lines, and I am ready to stuff the pillow. Okay, now that I have the pillow right side out, I'm just going to go back and poke out the corners just to make them, less curved and more pointy. So you can use your fingers, or you can take some scissors and poke them in there. Just be careful not to poke a hole through your fabric, because depending on the type of fabric it is, the weight of it, if it's lightweight, the scissors can go right through. I have had that happen. So just poke in there gently just to get the corners to go out and be more pointy than curved. And that was part of the reason for doing the trimming of the corners, was to prevent bulkiness and to help the corners be more pointy.
What are you doing? What are you doing with that pillow?
I am making this pillow for my youngest child who has a favorite pillow that you can see right here. It has seen better days. This is her little pillow that she uses at preschool when they take a nap, and it's been torn for a while. So I decided to make her a new pillow. And because I do like to reuse and repurpose fabric and various items when I can, we're just going to be taking the stuffing out of her old pillow and putting it into this pillow that I just sewed. So right here, we're just stuffing it and trying to get it, to a nice firmness that she'll feel comfortable with. And now that the pillow is all stuffed, I am pinning it closed with tucking in the seam allowances on the open edge, and I'm gonna just stitch these two sides together. It can be a little tricky because this pillow is bulky. Your line may not be as straight as you want it to. You can also do this by hand, just stitching it closed. But machine works as well. If you can keep the bulky part over and out of the way, you'll get it done. I did start out letting my child attempt to sew the pillow closed, but it was kind of a struggle. We were both getting a little bit tired. We were very hot in the room, so I just went ahead and did it. She did do it initially, but it wasn't. We were missing the under portion of the fabric, so it wasn't sewing it closed. There were still gaps where it was open, so I just went ahead and did it for her so that we could get it done. And it was tricky for me as well, trying to sew this part closed. I always laugh to myself about that. Like I've made so many clothing items, so many garments, done so many techniques with clothes, but sometimes when it comes to sewing simple things like a pillow or, a belt or something like that, I have the biggest struggle of my life for some reason with the simple things. And look at this. I still didn't sew this thing completely closed. I don't know what was going on this night. It was a struggle, but I just wanted to show you that even for people who have been sewing for years, it's not always getting it right on the first try. I have a seam ripper handy. I have to take out seams all the time and redo things. For whatever reason, sewing, it's labor. It's like it can really be work, and you get tired, your brain stops functioning correctly. You're just not doing things the way that you maybe typically would. So I had to do this over. And we finally got it done, finally got it right. And she has her pillow and she's very happy and looking forward to taking it to school soon. So I hope this information about sewing straight lines and seam allowances was helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comment section. But yeah, with sewing straight lines, you just want to practice. Here is what I was speaking about earlier, where you can just draw some lines on fabric and practice sewing straight. You can do zigzag lines and practice doing that as well. Now, where the zigzag comes in handy is helping you learn to pivot when you're sewing. That's sewing to a corner and then having to turn the other way. So you just sew to the corner, leave your needle down, even if you have to turn it with the hand wheel on the side of the machine. Raise up your presser foot and turn the fabric. That's what pivoting is. But this is a way you can practice. You can even do this on paper without thread. You can just sew on straight lines. It'll just leave some holes in the paper. And just keep practicing. That's really what sewing is about, is practicing. When I got into school for design way back in 2001, I will never forget my design professor telling the class that she is not going to teach us how to sew. She said, "This is a design program. You need to know how to sew before you come in here." and I did not know how to sew. I had never sewn. I had a seamstress in my family, but I had never learned to sew myself. So I'm essentially a self-taught seamstress because she didn't teach us. I never took a class. I just had to teach myself and do the best that I could. So this is possible. You just keep practicing, and eventually you'll get it. You'll be able to do basic and maybe even advanced sewing techniques to make the things that you want to make with a sewing machine. Just practice, practice, practice. All right. Hope this was helpful. Again, please let me know if you have any questions or comments. Thanks so much for watching.
You showed
Fabric tight. I can tell because it's not really moving. Let it go. You let go. Why is it? Hold on. Maybe we change the stitch to make it super tight or something. Reverse thing, because that slows it down.
Hey.
Push it. You just guide it back to the line. You're just lining the edge up with the fabric. Good job, sir.
Guys like that.